Hi everyone, I wanted to share with you what I consider the 10 most important tips to extending your tomato season. I am well over 6 foot tall, and if I was growing my tomatoes vertically, I would have been forced by now to have cut the tops. So my first tip is you need to invest in tomato hooks. Now, this is a tomato hook, and this is my tomato plant. If I was growing this plant vertically, by now I would have been forced to have had to cut the top of this plant because this is a very, very tall plant. By now, it would have been hitting the roof of this balcony and I would have been forced to cut it. So with a tomato hook, I can grow my tomatoes almost in a horizontal manner, extending the string and lengthening the rope so that the tomato has room to grow. So it can grow and grow and grow, and I get to harvest all the tomatoes that are growing as this plant grows.
So this is how I make my tomato hooks. When making your tomato hooks, you need a wire. Now, the type of wire that you're going to need depends on a few things. First of all, you need to consider that the wire you're going to use will need to hold the weight of your tomato plants and the tomato fruit. So you need a strong wire. This is how I bend my wire. Sorry that the video is not so clear, but if you're really interested in seeing how I make my tomato hooks, then please comment below in the video and I will do an exclusive video just showing you how I make my tomato hooks. This is a good tip for those who are already planning for their summer garden next year. If it's a little bit too late for you to make tomato hooks, might be a good idea for you to try and make your own next year. So this is how I bent my wires. It's not very difficult to make the tomato hooks. It's very easy. I was at first thinking it's going to be a huge challenge, but it is much cheaper to make your own hooks than buying. So almost done. Just one last bend and then we are done. So this is it. We are done. This is how you make the hook. It's not very complicated, like I said. The next thing is you need to add your string that you're going to use. The length of the string will determine how tall your tomato will get. So make sure you add enough string. I don't have the normal string that I use for my tomatoes, but I have a lot of macrame cord which I decided to use. At least I get to use something that is nice and strong. And that is it. The rest of the string that is left, you will need to tie to the stem of the tomato plant. So, finished. And that is it.
The second tip is you need to consider a mid-summer fertilization. you need to amend your soil mid-summer. These plants have been producing a lot of fruit. I have been enjoying my tomatoes fresh from the balcony, and most of the nutrients in the containers have really been sucked out. So you need to amend your soil with organic compost or fertilizer. But apart from that, you also need to be giving your tomato plants every 7 to 14 days organic liquid fertilizer. The reason is, like I said, the tomatoes have been sucking the juices, the nutrients from the soil. Now, the organic matter that you're putting in the soil needs to be worked on by the microbes, and it takes a long time. The tomatoes need food right now. So it means when you give them the liquid fertilizer, they get to benefit from the liquid fertilizer immediately, and the organic matter or the organic fertilizer that you have put in the soil will be benefiting the plants long term.
So this is how I do my soil amendments. I love using organic fertilizer. There are different types of organic fertilizers that you can use. I love Oscana. This is a brand that is found in Germany, but you can use any organic fertilizer. Apart from using organic fertilizer, my containers always get worm castings. Worm castings are put in my containers at the beginning of summer and at the end of summer, and all the time when I feel that my plants look a little bit weak and they need a little bit of strength, then I add worm castings, which are full of microorganisms which break down the fertilizer that is in the soil. So this is how I do it. I give a handful of organic fertilizer. Like I said, any organic fertilizer is okay. And this is how healthy my soil looks. As you can see, I have a lot of tiny worms. The soil is rich and the plants have all the nutrients that they need in the soil when they require the nutrients. I had another handful, so 1 to 2 handfuls of organic fertilizer is enough, and I mix it up in the soil that the soil has all the nutrients and the plants can get the nutrients from the soil. So use any organic fertilizer that you have.
The third tip that you need to consider is you need to water your tomato plants consistently. You need to have the same amount of water if possible, watering the same amount of water, and they need water consistently. If you're not watering your tomatoes consistently, it leads to problems such as blossom end rot, the tomato splitting or cracking, and it's not nice when you're eating a cracked tomato or tomatoes that are split. So you need to water your tomato plants consistently. The fourth tip is you need to prune the tomato leaves and you need to prune the suckers. Tomatoes grow, they love giving out a lot of leaves, and if you leave the leaves growing, it might lead to fungal diseases. So you need to prune the suckers, you also need to prune some of the leaves. This will allow the tomato plants to have airflow around them and will lessen the degree or the percentage that you will develop fungal diseases. My fifth point is you need to consider spraying your tomatoes with hydrogen peroxide. A hydrogen peroxide solution, the 3%, helps to reduce the risk of getting fungal diseases on your leaves. I usually use a ratio of 1 to 10. That means if I'm using 25 milliliter hydrogen peroxide, I mix it with 250 milliliters water. And with that solution, I spray my tomato leaves every 7 to 14 days. Remember to test spray. Remember, every time you're spraying something in your garden, you need to do a test spray so that you don't destroy your leaves. You need to test spray so that you see how the solution reacts with your leaves. If it burns your leaves, then you need to reduce the amount of hydrogen peroxide to the amount of water that you're using. Yeah. My sixth tip is you need to keep on picking ripe tomatoes. I have a lot of ripe tomatoes in my garden, and my next job is to pick all the ripe tomatoes. When you pick the ripe tomatoes, it allows your plant to invest most of its energy in new flowers, and you get more fruit. I know people who pick their tomatoes when they are only slightly pink and allow them to ripen in the house. I personally prefer picking my tomatoes when they're this red.
These are my tomatoes. I have different types of tomatoes. I have pest tomatoes, I have beefsteak tomatoes, and yeah, as you can see, they're ripe. And to try and improve the tomatoes, the growth of the tomatoes, I have to harvest the majority of these tomatoes. So these are the tomatoes. My favorite tomato is the black cherry. As you can see, I've been harvesting a lot of them. And this is how they look. It's time to harvest the majority of these tomatoes. As you can see, they look amazing.
My seventh tip is you need to consider rooting your suckers to extend your growing season. I have some dwarf tomato varieties, and the dwarf tomato varieties, after they finish producing fruit, they die. They don't produce any more fruit. So consider rooting suckers that can replace some of your determinate tomatoes. Then you have a continuous supply of tomatoes. Rooting your suckers is also beneficial if you have a long growing season and you have a lot of determinate tomatoes. Then you can just root your suckers and plant them later on to take up the position of your determinate tomatoes. Because as you know, determinate tomatoes, once they finish producing fruit, they don't produce anymore. So you can replace your determinate tomatoes with your rooted tomato suckers. Tip number 8 is consider using an electric toothbrush. I use my electric toothbrush to fertilize some of the tomatoes. And when you're fertilizing the tomatoes and you don't have a lot of pollinators, with your electric toothbrush, it means you get more fruit. More fruit means extended tomato season. So consider using an old electric toothbrush to hand pollinate your tomatoes. My 10th tip is, as the season starts to get a little bit colder, consider covering your tomato plants with plastic or covering your pots with plastic, because that will keep the roots warm and will trick the tomato into producing more fruit even as the weather starts to get cooler. I have some coverings that I cover my pots with because I have mostly grow bags. I will show you a video. I will show you a clip of what I use, but I cover my pots to keep the warmth inside the containers, and that helps me to get more tomatoes even as the season gets cold.
So this is how I try to keep my grow bags warm. I use fleece, or I also use cocoa mats. I simply cover the pots like I have shown you here in this video. I cover the pots, and then I also put straw on top of the pots. This ensures that the pots remain nice and warm, and the roots don't get too much exposure to the cord. This is how I do it. So I cover the tops of the grow bags with straw, and I cover the containers or the grow bags with cocoa mats. Sometimes I use fleece, and if I have nothing, then I also use plastic. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you subscribe to my channel as I continue giving you tips on fall crops. I have already started some of my fall crops. As you can see in this video, I have some collard greens growing. Thank you so much for watching, and have a lovely day.